Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Resilience and Motivation Mastermind hosted by the Hunter New England Central Coast Primary Health Network. My name is Hannah Jenkins, and I'm a Primary Care Improvement Officer working out of the Newcastle office. I'm facilitating today's webinar with Cheyenne Moody, who is a bushfire recovery coordinator working out of the Tamworth office. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we live and work on, and pay respect to elders past, present, and future. This mastermind is following on from the webinar that was presented by Craner Plus in September on identifying and managing stress. Following that webinar, we asked what future topics would be helpful, and the most commonly suggested topic was resilience and motivation at work. Today, we are joined by Matthew Milne. Matthew is a rural mental health coordinator working for the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program in the Hunter region. He graduated from the University of Newcastle in 2012 with a Bachelor of Psychology, whereupon he relocated to Tamworth from Newcastle. Matthew completed his internship working as a rural psychologist, providing psychological interventions both in the office and on the road. Matthew has travelled far and wide across the New England Northwest, providing rural towns and communities with psychological services they would not have been able to access otherwise. Matthew continues his work in rural communities by providing mental health support, training and information, as well as connecting people in need with services that are both appropriate and local to them. On his days off, Matthew can be found bushwalking, gardening and volunteering for his local RFS brigade. Before I pass it over to Matthew, just a few housekeeping information. Please keep yourself on mute. If you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat box on the right-hand side or email us following the webinar. Matthew will answer any questions after his presentation. We also have a short survey at the end of the webinar that we encourage you to complete. So welcome again, and I'll just pass it over to Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for that introduction. It's very uncomfortable hearing a little spiel read out about yourself, but it is, I suppose, important to provide people with a bit of a background. But yes, I'm Matthew. I work for the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program, and I've been asked to speak today for the PHN about wellbeing and resilience in the workplace. And just to give you a little bit of information about the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program, there's 20 coordinators located across the state, and we live and work in rural areas. I'm based here in Maitland on Wanneroo country, and our job is to provide mental health training, information and resources to people in the bush and link them into appropriate care when the need or if the need arises. So we do a lot of training like this, and because we are limited by time, I'm going to jump through into the start of our presentation. We'll start by doing a bit of a recap on stress around some signs of stress, how stress affects the body, and hopefully this is not new information. It's information that we'll be building on following on from the last presentation. We're going to talk about how to deal with negativity in the workplace. That was something that was highlighted that people were interested in and found important. We're going to tie that into motivation and how we can perform to our full capacity at work. We'll then look at how to get support if things aren't going so well for us, and then we'll touch on how to build resilience at the end of the presentation. That little 40 minutes down there is to let me know that I need to get a wiggle on. So think about the presentation that was done at the last Mastermind. It was focused on stress. I wanted to recap a few of the more important things about stress. And first of all, stress is a universal emotion. It's something that we all experience, and we experience it in varying degrees. The way that stress affects us is also unique in that some things that stress one person might not be stressful for another person. But what it is important is that how our body reacts to stress is something that we have some information about. So we covered the fight, flight, or freeze. I keep saying we, although it wasn't me who ran that presentation last time. But fight, flight, and freeze was brought up. And this is the way that our body reacts when we're placed under stress. It's that feeling of discomfort that we get when our body is telling us that something is happening that's not right and we need to react or do something. Stress could be defined as the physical and emotional response to having demands made upon us. We've just covered the physical component. Often people associate that with butterflies in the tummy or a sick feeling, rapid breathing, an increase in their heart rate. These are things that let us know physically that something's not right, and it's our body preparing us to get away from that thing that's causing the stress or fight it. The emotional response is the thing that happens in our brain, and it's the thing that impacts us when we're at work or living our life, and we require focus or concentration or the ability to make decisions or rationalize. These are things that kind of go out the window when stress occurs, and it's our body focusing all its effort into staying alive. But in a time of the world when we're not fighting for survival every day, and there's the likelihood of us dying based on a decision or an external influence is very low, it doesn't quite matter to our body. It's still going to react the same way. The stress that gets caused might be from deciding where we're going to book our holiday, or it could be stress from an ever-increasing workload. Our body can't tell the difference between life or death situations, so it will just continue to do the thing that it knows how to do to keep us safe. The reactions are still the same. Just touching on that, it's important to realize that not all stress is negative. There's positive and negative stresses. A positive stress could be like planning a holiday, moving house, starting a new job, getting married. These are things that hopefully we've entered into willingly. It often is associated with a bit of a reward at the end, and that the hard work is going to pay off. But nevertheless, the stress that gets caused is very real from a positive, stressful experience, and we can be feeling the same way as when we have a negative, stressful experience. Now, I mentioned that workload before. When it comes to stress, there's a lot of other things in life that can stress us. Some of those things can be external or out of our control, and we'll touch a little bit on that as I move through this presentation. It could be things like the environment or politics, or things that are going on in rules and regulations or policies in the workplace, or it could be things that are a little bit closer to us, and that could be friends, family, or people who are in our life that influence us or help us out, or we're in contact with. Or the stress can be something that's internal. It could be pressure that's placed on ourselves that we do to ourselves. All of this stress, both positive and negative, ends up in what I like to refer to as our stress bucket. It's a bucket that we carry around with us, hypothetical bucket, and all of our stress goes into it on a day-to-day basis. And we need to have ways to empty our stress bucket. If we get to the end of the day or the end of the week or the month and our stress bucket's overflowing, well, it's not going to be too long until that bucket overflows and we're overwhelmed and we can't carry on anymore. What it's important for us to do is make sure that we have some strategies to empty our stress bucket. We can put a tap on it, do things like make decisions or have choices or take time to relax or practice some self-care. Either way, it's about emptying that stress bucket in a way that we can find effective, and then be able to take on the stresses of the new day and the next day and continue to keep getting out of bed every morning and keep dealing with the normal ups and downs of stress. So what does it look like? Again, hopefully this is a bit of a refresher. Even though everyone experiences stress a different way, you can look at some people and tell they've got a lot going on. Others might also have a lot going on, but are kind of like that duck where they're calm on the surface of the water and going a million miles an hour underneath the water. But here's a few of the more common symptoms. Interestingly, this list of symptoms comes from a slide that I use to educate people about the symptoms and signs that other people might be experiencing when they're dealing with stress. But funnily enough, those same symptoms and signs are the things that we also go through when we experience our own stress. So you could be angry or irritable, feeling nervous or worried about something. Again, quite common, but this is not an exhaustive list, and the intensity that people experience these signs at could be different from person to person and dependent on the situation. Trouble with concentrating, low energy, often associated with reduced performance at work, not meeting goals, not working effectively, procrastinating their things. This is a sign that stress might be building. Physical things like headache and trouble sleeping adds to stress. Headache could be a sign that we've got too much stress on. We could be either sleeping too much or too little, but either way, those two things can build to our stress. We'll be either sleeping too much and not managing that stress or dealing with it effectively, or stress will be preventing us from sleeping, and we'll be feeling like we have even less energy, will be less sharp and less focused when we're arriving at work the next day. Stress can also impact our relationships, not just the one with our significant other. It could be our relationship at our workplace with our manager or colleagues. It could be with our friends and family. Anyone or anything that we can have a relationship with can be affected by stress. Sometimes people will withdraw from those social networks as well when they're affected by stress. People who have too much going on might sort of withdraw into themselves so they can manage that stress. But if they're not firing on all cylinders, if they've got problems with concentrating, they've got low energy, they might not be working effectively. So that social withdrawal is actually leaving them no better off than if they were managing their stress. And then changes to appetite and alcohol use. Again, we often see an increase in a person's alcohol use to manage stress. If we're experiencing discomfort emotionally or physically, alcohol can go a long way to sort of numb those feelings or make their intensity less. But often what we're doing in those situations is leaving us down the track in a much worse off position, where we might have to be starting to deal with an alcohol dependency issue if the stress still exists and we haven't dealt with that underlying issue. Now, people often talk about burnout in a workplace setting, and they usually relate it to stress, but burnout is not stress. If you could imagine stress as juggling a million balls at once. They're all different things that are going on, but we've still got them up in the air. We're just holding on. It's looking a bit shaky. That is stress. Burnout, on the other hand, is where those balls have fallen to the ground and they fell down there last week, and honestly, we don't even care. So stress is when you're giving it your all, and burnout is when you've got nothing left to give. Now, some of the signs of burnout are very similar to stress, but the intensity that we experiencing them is at a far greater intensity. So the emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, we've touched on a few of the signs of stress. When we've got nothing left to give, our empathy is low, our energy is low, and our ability to focus and concentrate and do just normal mental calculations and processes is also very low. Now, burnout can develop when stress is existing for a long period of time without being dealt with, and that's why it's important that we have strategies to empty our stress bucket. Some of the results of burnout is obviously a loss of motivation and productivity, but it can also be the way that we perceive ourselves. We can feel helpless, underappreciated, or overloaded. And if we're burnt out in a work setting, we're not even really worried about work. We're trying to avoid it. That might be the source of where our burnout is. Now, if we're feeling burnt out at work and we're avoiding work and say we're staying home, it's important to know that those feelings can spill back into our personal lives. If we're being run ragged at work and we're getting home and we're exhausted, we've got nothing left in the tank, our family is going to feel those effects as well, and we're not going to be as effective in our life as we would like to be. So let's talk about stress in the workplace and how that could potentially lead to burnout. We spend so much of our life at work, so it makes sense that if things aren't right at work, it's going to contribute to a larger portion of stress in our stress bucket. So what causes stress in the workplace? A lot of the time, in my personal experience, it's been negativity in the workplace that causes stress, but it could be relationships between colleagues or line managers, having to deal with clients and customers. And having started my career at McDonald's, I've dealt with my fair share of customers who caused a lot of stress for me. And even though we were meant to say that the customer is always right, oftentimes they were always wrong. Deadlines and workloads, well, I've mentioned that as part of a negative stress. They can add to the pressure that we're experiencing in life, as well as the type of work that we do. And just in the same way that burnout can flow back into our personal life can affect our work. If we've got a lot of stress going on personally, that can spill into our work life and leave us less effective at work and less able to focus on the task at hand if our mental resources are actually somewhere else. So workplace negativity, I'd say it's probably the more common things around around workplace friction. There's a few different types of sources that workplace negativity can flow from, and it is dangerous to our mental health. If we spend a lot of time looking at the world through a negative lens, after a while we'll end up stuck there and we won't be able to focus or find the positivity that's in life, so it can impact our workflow. What does it look like? Well, there's a few different things that I've mentioned. The Debbie Downer there, it's that person that's always negative at work. Such a pessimist, never has anything good to say about anything, and when there's a change coming into work, it's the person that's resistant to the change. Micromanaging can also be a tough one to deal with and can lead to negativity in the workplace, as well as white-handing or undermining when people are in charge of something and people undermine their authority or the way that they've set up a policy or a procedure for something. Office politics and gossiping are also some pretty big challenges to workplace. I guess you call it cohesiveness. Office politics and gossip can create friction, and it's definitely something that adds to the stress of everyone, particularly those people who are involved. And how does it leave us feeling? Well, it can leave us feeling negative, it can leave us frustrated, and it can actually start to divide colleagues and teams. And when that starts to happen, the workplace is losing out because people are taking sides, or they're spreading gossip, or they're engaging in those office politics and other strategies of negativity, and the workplace is suffering because no one's working as a team. And how can it impact our work? Well, that team cohesiveness can be split, as I've already mentioned. People can be unproductive, and then you can basically end up with defensive staff who are faced with stress, who end up avoiding work because of the way that it is. So how do we address that negativity? Part of our professional skill set should be to manage workplace negativity and some of the things that occurs in a workplace. And we need to be mindful of our professional boundaries in the workplace when we're addressing this negativity as well. So here's a few things that we can do to help address that negativity. So first of all, we can start by resisting buying into that gossip and politics. If the gossip stops with you, then that's another day where rumours are not being spread and people are getting on with their work, instead of what a manager that I used to have called it the tea room mafia, where people would get in the tea room and talk and spread rumours and gossip about other colleagues, and it leaves people feeling left out and also feeling stressed by it. Try not to overanalyze situations, take it on face value, and if you've got an issue with someone at your workplace, there's often times a chain of command or a way that you can have those situations addressed. Focus on what you can control, which we'll touch on in the next slide. It can also help set boundaries. Let people know that you won't tolerate gossip, that you're not there to participate in it, and or you won't undermine someone. These are ways that you can let people know where you sit when it comes to those workplace behaviours that's occurring. Work on creating solutions in a workplace, especially if you've got a team that's divided. How can we get that team back together, and how can we get them working effectively as well? And if you've tried everything and you've still got that Debbie Downer who won't be positive about anything, you can try and kill them with kindness. It's one of the best things that we can do to disarm a person who's always trying to get at us or get negative and brings that into our day-to-day life. Perhaps you might be able to shed some happiness onto them, and if you're eventually that happy-go-lucky person that they can't get an edge on, then they'll just try to avoid you and leave you alone, hopefully. How do we stay positive at work? Well, there's a few things that we can do. We can practice self-care. We can try to avoid that negativity altogether. I'll talk about self-care towards the end, but one of the most important things we can do is to leave work at work, and that means when your shift's over or when the work day's finished, the work stays where the work is meant to be done and goes home, because home is not the right time or right place to be managing the work and bringing it home, and that's been tricky at the moment with a lot of us working from home. We need to have a clear barrier around what is work time and what is home time, because it stops us from being effective in our personal life if we're worried about work. We can try and reach out to external supports, and we'll talk about a few supports towards the end. And then we can try to focus on the good stuff. If we've got a lot of negativity going on around us, we can start to shift towards that negative worldview as well. But if we take some time each day to focus on what's good in life, and believe me, there is something good every day that happens, whether it's a cool flower that you see on the way home, or something a customer or a client says something that makes your day, try to remember those things and use them to avoid sitting in negativity all the time. So here are the circles of control and influence, and it's a pretty simple way of looking at how we can live our life effectively. The idea is that we have a limited amount of energy in life, and that energy is best spent when we direct that energy on what we can control and leave everything else that's out of our control. Because when we're focusing 100% of our energy on 100% of what we can control, then hopefully we're being 100% effective in life. But if we're focusing 50% of our energy on things that are outside of our control and 50% of things that are in our control, well, we're only 50% effective. So it's three concentric circles, and we've got there the circle of concern on the outside, the circle of influence in the middle, and then the circle of control. Each circle represents a certain different type of thing in our life, and I've touched on a few of the examples earlier when I was talking about stress. The circle of concern is something that we have, it's things in life that we have absolutely no control over. It could be the weather, it could be financial, it could be political, it could be work policy. It's these things that, that we don't have control over, so our energy is not very effective spending all that time worrying about those things or trying to change them. Often you'll see a lot of people who are resistant to change in a workplace spend their time worrying about those things that's in the circle of concern. It's not something that has the ability to be changed, but they still spend a lot of time dwelling on it instead of moving forward on what they can control. The middle circles, the circle of control and the circle of influence. This is sort of where our friends and family and relationships lie, and it's also our workplace as well. We have a little bit of influence over what happens at work, but overall, or with our friends and family, overall, we might be able to influence it to a certain degree, but we certainly don't have 100% control over it. We could spend a little bit of energy here. That's okay. We might be interested in what our friends and family are doing, and we might be genuinely wanting to help them out with something that they're dealing with, so we can spend some time there. Then the circle of control, I think that's pretty self-explanatory now. These are choices that we can make. It's the way that we can live our life. It's decisions that we can make and things that we can do. And that's where we should be spending the bulk of our energy. There's a lot more information out there. I've tried to break this down as simply as possible, but if you Google the circles of control and influence, you'll find a wealth of knowledge out there that can build on this. So let's talk about motivation. Motivation is the thing that gets us out of bed each morning. It's the thing that helps us stay productive through the day. And it's also the thing that kicks our butt when we notice that our clothes aren't fitting as well as they used to. But in a more technical sense, motivation is an activator of behavior for a purpose. There's a few types of theories behind motivation: drive theory, instinct theory, or Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We might have seen these before, but it's largely agreed that there are two types of motivators. They're internal and external motivators, and psychologists call them intrinsic or extrinsic motivators. And we've all got these types of motivators that are inside us, but we often have a preference for one or the other. Now, internal motivators, these are the types of motivators that give us the warm and fuzzies. It's where we get our purpose from feelings of personal satisfaction, like finishing a big project or volunteering or helping a friend move house or anything like that, helping a colleague with a workload. External motivators, on the other hand, are more like things that we aim for, or things that we get when we get to the end of something. So that could be like a trophy if you've done a marathon or something like that, or in a workplace, it could be money or recognition or praise. It's important to know that what motivates you might not motivate me, and sometimes it's healthy to have a combination of both, but finding what motivates us is the most important thing. And sometimes we need to stop and think about where our motivation is. If we're finding that we're in a bit of a rut at the moment, finding that thing that can get us motivated and up and at them again, it can really give us a spurt of energy to help us continue forward. And it's important to remember that motivation can be worn down when our motivators are lacking. And now, if you're at work and you're feeling unsatisfied or you're overwhelmed, or there's negativity in your workplace, that can start to wear down our motivation. So it's important to be mindful of where you're at and check in with yourself. Now, motivation is a skill that can be built on and developed over time. And these are a few strategies here to help you build that motivation and start working towards your goals. Now, the first thing that you can start doing is having a routine. It can be a simple way of activating our goal-driven behaviour that I spoke to in this previous slide. And if you're like me, you hate exercise, but if you incorporate it as part of the routine that you have, like whether it's daily or weekly, it can be a lot easier to do. But honestly, I'm still getting around to that. So secondly, you can have use SMART goal setting. So that means small, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-constrained goals. It means that we can be set up for success if we're ticking things off our list and we're getting those warm and fuzzies. As we're getting rewarded, we'll find that we'll be on a roll and hopefully we'll start to get back into feeling positive. We could chunk big tasks, and that can help us get a wiggle on when with larger projects or chores that seem too big to get started. If you break them down into smaller chunks, they don't seem as big a task, and we can get to work on those little pieces. Training and development can be important to help us build confidence and feel more confident in the work that we do. It can also help us stay interested, particularly if we've got continuous professional development. We can find a niche that we're interested in and work towards that. We can feel rewarded by getting some of that external validation when we're able to take on new tasks. Again, focusing on the positive by reminding ourselves about achievements that we've made, and then remembering why we do it at the end of the day. Now, sometimes we're going to end up in a rut no matter how hard that we try to avoid it, and that's part of life. It has its ups and downs. But we do need to focus on the good stuff and remember why we do it. Think about our motivators, whether they're internal or external, and think about what gets us out of bed each day. And that might take a little bit of self-discovery for us to do that, but we have the capacity to do it. We have the capacity to build motivation and continue to work on it. I talked about getting support, and regardless of how good we are at avoiding negativity or staying motivated or focusing what we can control or can't, there are going to be times when we're going to feel like the stress is overwhelming us, and there's a few things that we can do. These are the three main ways that we can limit stress and reduce burnout. So first of all, we can reduce the stress. Now that might be if you've got a big workload, there's a lot on at work and stuff that's causing you to feel overwhelmed, well, you can quit your job. How good's that? All of that stress has disappeared. Now you've created yourself some more stress though, because now you have to find a job, you've got bills to pay and no money coming in. So sometimes reducing the stress isn't always the most effective way of dealing with stress, but it is one important strategy that we can do. The second one we can do is increase our capacity to manage stress. So again, if you've got that large workload, asking a colleague to help out, palming off some of that work. If they take half of that work, well then we're hopefully feeling half as stressed now. It can be a good way to chunk down bigger projects into smaller bits, and then you start to feel like you can get on with that bit more effectively. Now, and the last one is probably the key, reducing the effects of stress upon us. So sometimes we're going to have to deal with stress that we're not going to be able to avoid. We're not going to be able to change it. We're just going to have to deal with it. And if we've got good self-care strategies, we should be able to reduce the effects of stress on us. Sometimes we need to be able to take time out for ourselves, take a bit of a break. Could be a holiday, it could be a hobby that we have. But reducing the effects of stress on us is tipping out that stress bucket. If you jump on Google and type in self-care, there's a million things that you're going to get. Suggestions. It could be practical stuff like doing a bit of sleep, getting better sleep, doing a bit of exercise. These are things that are going to help you out in the long run. So just to build on a few of those things, self-care is an effective way of managing stress, as I've just mentioned, and part of it is taking responsibility of how we're managing our life. Keys to self-care can be identifying what causes us stress and working to manage that. Sometimes self-care is saying no. If we've got a lot on, sometimes we don't have the capacity to take more on, we need to say no. If you continue to say yes, well, fairly quickly we'll end up overwhelmed. Tell people how you're feeling as well. If you're starting to feel stressed, let people know what's going on. And more importantly, make time to work on yourself. We don't often look at our watch and think, holy dooly, there's a free hour, I might do some knitting. Often we'll look to clean the house or do something that we've put by the wayside. So chisel some time out of the routine that hopefully everyone will be setting up to stay motivated and work self-care into it. Look for things that we enjoy, build on exercise, sleep or diet, which is an important part of maintaining good mental health. Maintain a social network, reflect on things that are good, and go easy on the grog, especially important coming into the silly season. A routine I mentioned is really important, as well as thinning out our to-do list. If we start to kick off some of the more shorter achievable things, we'll start to feel like we're on top of it. Don't overcommit yourself, and again, learning how to say no is an important part of working and establishing boundaries, and ask for help when you're swamped. Look at what you can and can't control, and I encourage you to have a look at those circles of control and influence and think about how you can apply it in your life. Take a breath and take a break. And that also means, that could mean having a holiday, but throughout the workday, it could just be going out the front for 5 minutes of fresh air. And finally, how to build resilience. Resilience is an important part. It's a combination of all the things that we've talked about so far. And when we combine the strategies of managing stress, staying motivated and achieving goals, we'll build a nice base of resilience. Sleep, diet, exercise are the 4 pillars, and social interaction are the 4 pillars of mental health. And if we're not working on those things and have them stable, it's going to cause shaky mental health. And that's where stress can start to creep in. Learn what we can and can't control and practice that. Get in touch with ways that you can get help. Find that purpose in your life, why you get out of bed each day, and that will build and keep your motivation. Well, where can you get help? We're going to talk about that in the next slide. I think Hannah's going to touch back on some more specific things for you, but a GP is always a great place to start. Hopefully a few of you know a GP that you can get in touch with. You also have access to an EAP program. Psychologists are a great way to encourage some social supports, some professional supports, but social supports like friends and family are also a great option. You can also give me a call if you're unsure about ways that you can access local help, and there's plenty of options online. So that brings me to the end of my PowerPoint. I'm conscious about time, and I have breezed over a few of the later slides in the presentation, but hopefully now is the time that anyone who has questions can ask those questions, and we'll be able to flesh out a few more of those points. So thank you very much for giving me your attention for this time. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and I hope you've taken something out of it today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Matt. I've definitely gotten a lot out of that presentation. Now, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat box. But while we're waiting, I do have a couple of questions on my own, Matt. So before you did say that if you work towards a goal, that can help you to begin and stay motivated. And you also mentioned routine is the best way to incorporate goals. But what about people, and I think it's quite normal, our kids might get sick, we might have to work overtime, just something will happen in our life which will distract us and cause us to not work towards that goal, which means we won't really receive those rewards to help keep us stay motivated. So what do you say to people who have those situations?
Life is busy and it's full of unpredictable things, and that adds to our stress. And some of these things are unavoidable. But I think the key thing and part of smart goal setting is that when we notice that we've strayed away from, that routine or those things that were keeping us motivated, or we've lost our purpose, it's okay to acknowledge that that's happened and then reset and figure out what our goal is again, figure out what we would like to do and like to achieve or reach, find out what's going to drive us, and then reapply and start doing that again, start working towards that goal. We can there's no shame in being distracted by a goal through life, because there's a lot of stuff on. It could be, kids or people getting sick or something like that. These are things that can derail our routine and our normal processes that we have for staying well. But once we do realize, the most important thing that we can do is to look at what happened, set up some healthy behaviors around that, refocus on what our goals are, and then set off again.
Amazing. That's, yeah, definitely kicks me into gear, and something I need to maintain as well. I think it's pretty standard for distractions to come along in our life, and we just have to get back up and do it again. Another question I have, so you talk about SMART goals. Can you give a real life experience of one?
Oh, okay. I'll pick one out of my life at random. Now, this is the part where I admit that I don't necessarily practice what I preach, because life happens to me as well, and sometimes I fall off the wagon. A great example is where I decided that I wanted to shed a few kilos. This is probably relatable for a lot of people. And so I started doing like a couch to 5K app thing, where you start, and it's a very slow, you do walking and then you start building some running in. And what I wanted to do by using the SMART process was figure out apply that principle to making sure that I can get to the end where I can run 5K. So first of all, my small goal was to lose a few kilos, and in the process I wanted to do it. How I wanted to do it was by increasing my exercise. How I was going to measure it was by the distance that I was running and the weight loss, obviously. How was I going to achieve it? Well, that was by using this app. It helps you, like what you run each day, or you do an activity each day, and then you have some rest time in between. It was going to sort of train me to get to that point. Was it realistic? Well, yes. I'm, reasonably fit. I've played rugby most of my life, but I've stopped that. But I was able to do it. There was nothing that was preventing me from doing it. And time measured, well, I was going to give myself to the end of the app. Did it over, I think it was 12 weeks. And that was how I was going to be limited by time. So I started off really well. By the time I'd reached sort of week 8, I was really starting to pull up. The Couch to 5K app, as great as it was, didn't account for how unfit I'd become. And so I started to take more rest days off, and then eventually I fell off the wagon and stopped opening the app each day and stopped reaching my goal. I reached out to a mate who runs marathons and stuff like that, explained to him about the situation, and he basically told me that it's a long process, and it's very hard to go from doing no long distance running to doing a lot of running. And so he told me that the best thing I could do was have a crack again. And sure enough, I already had a base level of fitness. So by the time week 8 rolled around again, I powered through to the end. And I think that's my real life example that's relatable to most people.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess that also links back into my first question as well, is what do you do once you get distracted and something happens, is just keep going,
Yeah,
keep achieving it.
I'm far from perfect, and I'm far from being immune to all of this stuff in life as well.
Yeah. So I can see there's still no questions. I've just got one more question as well. So before you mentioned in regards to resilience and becoming resilient, sleep was one of the key factors that you mentioned. What about, I think it's quite normal for people to go to bed and then they lay in bed for, it might be half an hour, it might be a couple of hours before they actually fall asleep. What would you say about improving that and being able to fall asleep quicker and to have appropriate sleep health?
Sleep is one of the most crucial things for maintaining sound mental health. And when our sleep is a bit out of whack, it means that we're not feeling refreshed in the morning, and just that lack of feeling refreshed can then affect how positive we are through the day. It can affect the way that we're feeling, the way that we interact, and it can be this sort of runaway train where we start to end up in a place of negativity, and it might be us that's the negative or the Debbie Downer at work. And so it's important for us to recognize when our sleep's poor, especially if we've got a lot on and we are getting stressed. There's a lot of things that we can do to help improve sleep, especially if once our head hits the pillow where our brain is going a million miles an hour, just trying to think of different scenarios and different options and different things that we need to do, one of the best things that we can do is try to get that stuff out of our head and put it on a piece of paper. If you make a bit of a commitment to yourself that you're going to write down all the things that's going on in your head, things that you need to check or do at work tomorrow, or ask or look after. If you can put them on a piece of paper and tell yourself that by putting it there, you're not going to be forgetting it, because you'll pick that piece of paper up in the morning and remember all those things, can be a great way to start offloading some of that stuff before you get to bed. There's a lot of other sleep hygiene tips that you can do to improve sleep, like making sure your room's dark, that it's the right temperature, although that's going to be hard coming into summer where we're getting days that's like bloody 40 degrees. We're also working on having a comfortable bed, making sure that it's quiet, and once you've got all those things, hopefully you've got a good sleeping environment. The next thing you can do is start to set up a bit of a bedtime routine. So it could be, have dinner, watch a bit of TV, have a shower, brush your teeth, and then get into bed. If you're doing that thing every day consistently as part of your routine, your body will actually start to know when bedtime's coming. It'll recognize that, you've had dinner, you've watched a bit of TV, you're in the shower. Oh, next step's brushing teeth and then bed. And your body will start to get ready and produce that melatonin that gets you to sleep. So you can definitely train your body for better sleep. But if you are having trouble with sleep and it's been a long time happening, talking to your GP is pretty important. And letting, or even getting the help from a psychologist who can sort of work on sleep hygiene and good sleep practices.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right, I am mindful that we are actually 2 minutes over the 40 minutes. So Matt, can you please go to the next slide? And I'll just quickly go over the contact list, which we showed at the last Mastermind session. So for the top one, Craner Plus offers 24/7 counselling to health workers and their families, so please take advantage of that if you require support. There's also the Members Assistance Program that our PHN has expanded through to practices, which provide 3 free counselling sessions to all practices within our PHN region. There's also Safe Work Australia, which offer information and resources to support small businesses and employees to minimise psychological risks. So that's a great site if you'd like more information for your practice as well. Then there's also Lifeline, which offers 24/7 crisis support, and there's Phoenix Australia, which offer trauma-related training to assist health professionals to better support their patients. Last but not least, and I'm sorry for rushing through this, there is also the Better Access initiative, which offers 10 free counselling sessions to everyone, not just health professionals, but everybody within Australia. And now with the pandemic, there's an additional 10 free counselling sessions available. So if you're interested in accessing these, then please speak to your GP and they will help create a mental health treatment plan and refer you on to an appropriate psychologist. Okay, Matt, can you please go to the next slide? And I just want to quickly go over health pathways, just a friendly reminder that it's there, it's to be used. It helps health professionals refer patients to local specialists and services in a timely way. And there's actually also support for health professionals. You can see it's circled here in red in the drop-down box. So please go on our health pathways and check that out when you've got a chance. And the next slide, please, Matt. All right, awesome. So that's the end. Just a big thank you, Matt, again, for your informative presentation. You certainly kicked me into gear, and I'm definitely going to establish a goal now and work towards it. And when I get distracted, just keep going again and again and build my own motivation and resilience. And also thank you to everyone who has attended today. PHN are genuine in offering mental health support to practices in our region, and we will certainly continue to provide relevant mental health masterminds and share useful resources with you all. If you'd like to access this presentation and any resources which are mentioned in this presentation, then please go on our People Bank website. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day.